Hi, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to talk about a book I just finished. And the book is called A Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman. Now, this book was recommended by Steve Donahue on BookTube, and the subtitle is The Calamitous 14th Century. And I've read Froissart's Chronicles, which covers the same period. So I was eager to read this and compare it to Froissart and say what I think about Barbara Tuchman, a modern historian. This was published in the 1970s, so I was eager to go over that same material, and I do find that one of the things that I like, it were complex things with a lot of stuff to learn. I like to go over it another time, great from another source. The more you go over it, then the more that you can retain it and enjoy thinking about it. And so it just establishes it more in your mind when you repeat the same material. To summarize what she does, the way that she approaches history, she looks at the kings. You have mainly Edward III in England. Then you have in France, you have Jean. You have the popes. So those are the main players. And so she concentrates on who has the power, who is the monarchy, what they're doing with the power, including the popes who have religious power, and how the borders of their territories are changing. So there's a lot of events, there's a lot of battles, and she goes over all of them all. Now, she does an excellent job. When I read the bibliography of her book, it just amazes me that anybody could maintain that level of concentration on all these books and organize it all and retell the story after reading all those books. I'm continually amazed on how intelligent and focused these writers of this type of history are. She does a very interesting thing in her history, and that is she introduces this nobleman named Enguerrand de Coucy, and she uses him and his life as a way to see the whole century, because he was a significant figure. He had some power, not like a monarch, but he had power, and he really was an amazing person. And as a biography of him and a person in that period, it's really fascinating, his life. As all these events occur, he participated in many of them. He was an advisor to England. He owned a lot of property in France, and he advised the King of France. So he was a very smart man. Later on, he did participate in a campaign in Italy, and also in a crusade at the very end in Necropolis. I really liked the way she did that. It was kind of a very smart thing for her to do, to highlight one man at this time. The leaders. In England, you have the Plantagenets. In France, you have the Valois. In the Habsburgs in Austria, the Visconti in Milan, Luxembourgs in Bohemia. You also have the houses of Navarre, Castile, Aragon. So then there's a little bit about Flanders and Jacob van Artevelde. We talk about wealth inequality today, and when you see that in these monarchies, the inequality of the wealth between the poor and the rich are just running everything. They pretty much have total control. And it just, to me, the way that the century unfolds is what happens when you have extreme wealth inequality. So that is interesting to compare to today's events. There's lots of battles. It's called all the battles together are called the 100 Years' War. And they were happening in Spain. They were happening in England. They were happening in the north coast of France. They were happening in Eastern Europe. There were battles there. And at the end, there's Necropolis and the Crusades. So it's just battle after battle. Let's see. She talks about the persecution of the Jews. She talks about the plague and the significance of that. One of the big battles was the Battle of Poitiers. The Black Prince was leading the English side, and they captured the King of France, Jean, or called Jean, and there was an enormous ransom, and it really showed the kind of the stupidity of France. If you look at all the conflicts of France, France really comes across as being very overconfident and very flashy. They spent a lot on their armor, but they didn't spend much time on military strategy or weapons. You know, the English really had the longbow, and that was much more effective than the French, who were like using the crossbow. And then sometimes the French would hire some Italians to assist them. In at least one case, they didn't take advantage of these Italian archers. So the French just come across in general as way overconfident and really blew many things. They were going to invade England, and then that didn't work. They were going to help in Scotland. That didn't work. They were going to go after the Flanders, and that didn't work. They just have many, many failures. And so they come across as, just part of the problem, not part of the solution. They also sponsored the Pope when there was a schism in the Catholic Church, and they sponsored the Pope in Avignon, and that caused a lot of religious things. And so the way the story unfolds, the French look pretty bad. If you see my channel, I have read The Story of Civilization by Will Durant. And when I was reading this material, I was like, wow, I don't remember any of that stuff from The Story of Civilization by Will Durant. And I went back to my Will Durant books, 11 volumes, and I looked it up, the one that he covers the 1300s. The book is called The Renaissance. And Will Durant, he spends the whole 1300s in Italy, all of it. It's all Italy, Venice, because that's where the interesting things were happening. That's where ideas were happening. That's where they were kind of advancing civilization. But when you look at France and England and Germany and Spain, there's some really bad people here. You know, most of the characters in here are just reprehensible, vain, abusing their power, revengeful. It's really disappointing, the human qualities of most of the characters in the book. You know, even the Cousset, who is a pretty smart guy, she obviously favors him because of his participation in all these military conflicts. You know, he's just kind of another military guy. I took lots of notes because when I'm reading a book like this, there's so many things going on. It helps me to take notes and kind of slows me down when I write down the names, and it really helps me to keep interested and keep everything straight in my head. So I recommend taking notes on this type of book. Here's a good statement. She says, when she talks about a failure of France, she says, in individuals as in nations, contentment is silent, which tends to unballast the historical record. So that's a good point, because she talks about many of these conflicts, but she doesn't really talk about any favorable things of what was going on. She does talk about some of the rebellions. There were certain people who were very admirable, and they tried to reform the church, like John Wycliffe, Catherine of Siena. They made attempts to try to fix some of these things, and they were always beaten down. There was a peasant revolt in England, the Wat Tyler. They were beaten down, humiliated, to serve as a lesson that, you know, if you should stay in your place. So Wycliffe said, "For each man that shall be damned by his own guilt, and each man that is saved shall be saved by his own merit." Here's a good quote from Tuchman: "To admit error and admit losses is rare among individuals and unknown among states." Some of the things I was more interested in reading, at the end of Edward III's reign, there was a woman, Alice Perers, who kind of controlled Edward III when he was going kind of crazy, and that was kind of an interesting story. If anybody knows about another book about that, I would be very interested. Also, you know, Charles the King Charles in Charles VI in France, he went crazy too. There's a similarity between the two monarchs who went crazy at the end of their terms. The last big campaign, like I said, is Necropolis, where it was a crusade to defeat the Saracens, they call them, or the Turks, or the Muslims, and that failed spectacularly. And that was a defeat for Enguerrand de Crusade, and that was kind of where we leave him. She does do a little epilogue, and some of it spills over into the 1400s. But I'm really glad I read it. It's a great, great book. So I recommend it. Thanks for watching.